Welcome back to HTM Insider. I'm Sherelle with Multi Medical Systems, your host. And we're back again with another topic that I think needs some attention. I'm so excited to have Heidi on today. Heidi Horn has been in the industry for quite a long time, and she's also working with Amy. And we're going to kind of explore standardizations in the HTM industry. So Heidi, thank you for coming on. And why don't you introduce yourself and kind of your background to our guest?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Sherelle. It's been it's an honor to be joining the show, and I really get a kick out of talking to you and all our HTM friends out there. So, yeah, as you mentioned, this is a hot topic, and we'll get to it. But just a quick background for those of you I have not met, and hopefully we'll meet soon. My name is Heidi Horn, and I'm the president of Heidi Horn HTM Consulting, which is a consulting company I started back in May. Prior to that, though, I do have over, I keep saying over 20 years, but I hate to admit it's now 25 plus years of experience in the HTM world. I ran a fairly large HTM organization for a large health system. I had 22 hospitals, about 120 technicians reporting up to me, and did that for, like I said, I was in there for decades working with that area. For the past 4 years prior to joining or starting my own firm, I actually worked for a company called Nuvolo, which is a CMMS provider. And that's where I think, and we'll talk a little bit about this, I'm sure, where it really became clear to me working with all the dozens and dozens of clients across the United States, how unique and different all HTM organizations are, and how they all see themselves as having best practices, and everybody thinks that their way is the best way. But it really does create a lot of, quite frankly, extra work, and not, unfortunately, not everybody's quote best practice is a best practice. So we'll talk about that. But yeah, so that's my background. I'm also, you mentioned, I'm on the Amy board. I've been with Amy since 2005, actually. And I'm on the treasurer of on the executive committee of the Amy board. And so that's a wonderful organization. And I have utmost respect for all those folks there. And one of the things, as you know, that Amy does is it provides standards and guidelines and everything else. And so, again, it was through that work with Amy that I really started to appreciate the need and what standards brings to organizations. So.
Now, I know there's a lot being talked about out there, social media and other periodicals. Standardization, and exactly what are we going to talk about today? Because there's a different...
So I guess the area that most interests me, I'm looking for the low-hanging fruit. And I know some people want let's standardize on how we do every, PM or this, that, or the other. We're not talking about that. That's not, to me, that's a little bit more complicated, quite frankly, because all repairs and all maintenance needs are a little bit different. And so to come up with a standardized practice for how to approach something like that is going to take, I'm not saying it wouldn't be possible, but it would require a lot more work. What I'm really interested in are those areas, and we might not even realize it, that we are all doing things differently that don't make a whole lot of sense. For example, again, being with this in the CMMS world, I realized that everybody had different work order codes. Some people call it corrective maintenance. Some people call it repair. Some people call it this, that, the other. But even within those, they would have different type of things and different failure codes. And so everybody's using different data points. Their, again, the response codes, all those, just the codes themselves, everyone's calling it something different. They're tracking the data differently. And those are the things that make no sense to me whatsoever. Because again, those are things that we can standardize on. And if you think about the amount of time it takes to configure a CMMS to be specific to your department's unique needs, that's extra cost, it's extra time. And I will tell you, it's very, very hard for all CMMS companies to support them. Because again, when you're calling in, you say, I have a problem because my repair codes aren't working or whatever it might be. you're completely different than everybody else. So that's just one example. Things like, again, Joint Commission and CMS, DMV, they're all very, very vague in their regulations. However, how we interpret those as an industry also are very different and variable. And things like, I just wrote this down because I wanted to make sure I got the wording correctly. There's so CMS says you have to provide PMs on devices that are new equipment with a sufficient amount of maintenance history. That's exact words. So new equipment with sufficient amount. So, but what is sufficient? What does that mean? Some people say, well, if I've had it a week, it's sufficient. If I've had it 2 years, it's sufficient. Again, everybody is interpreting that differently. And so how their policies and procedures play out and how they are, operating is very, very different. So those are just some examples of things that I think are what I call low-hanging fruit that we should be able to agree on. Give case in point, and this just drives me nuts sometimes. Is it planned maintenance, preventive maintenance, or preventative maintenance? And you see it all over the place. Like, can we just agree that this is what we call it, and be consistent on it. So those are, so when we talk about standards, and even our name, HTM, are we HTM? Are we clinical engineering? Are we, biomed, whatever. So we can't even agree on that. So I think we've come to a point in time where being unique and different, it used to be part of our DNA. We had this get her done attitude, and you don't really worry about the procedures, necessarily the policy all the time. You go get it done. You fix the equipment as fast as you can. But those days, quite frankly, of not having any of those standardized best practices, really identifying what the best practices are and agreeing to them and practicing them are over, because we now need, we need data to compare ourselves to each other. We need to be able to show that we're doing a good job. We need to be able to, if you can't compare yourself to other organizations, how can you say you're the best of the best? Or how can you even say you're doing an adequate job? How can you tell your C-suite you're doing a pretty good job? You can't, because you can't compare it. So anyway, you can see I'm very passionate about this.
I love it, though. I love it. So how are you at Amy? Let's just say Amy's working on this initiative to gather these people, and there's a lot of people to gather.
Yeah.
And how are you going to standardize that across the board with so many, I'm going to say, whether it's an ISO to a large in-house program? How you can get all those meetings of the minds to happen to see who has the best terminology to adapt it and enforce it.
Right. Well, it takes people. And so that is the big thing right now is Amy has, I'll use on the sterilization side of Amy, they have some wonderful standards, and these sterilization OEMs have come together and agreed on, these are the best sterilization practices. These are the best things to do. And it makes a lot of sense for them, and so that, again, they can ensure that the sterilization equipment they're building matches up with what those best practices are, and they're agreeing on that. Where we've always struggled in HTM, though, is the coming together part. And so what, this is kind of a first thing that we're, when I say we, Amy, but also other organizations, ACCE and others, have kind of come to the point where I think we agree as an industry, we need to start looking at this a little bit more. So the first step is really just make people aware. I think when you say standards, everyone out there thinks, oh my goodness, one, it's those are rules. We don't like rules that we have to follow. And those rules will be more costly and they will slow us down. And if done properly, that's actually the opposite will occur. If you create and identify best practices and turn them into standards, then you're not reinventing the wheel every time. You're not going out and saying, okay, what do they've come up with this AEM thing. Now I got to manage it. What do I do with that? what are the steps I have to take? And as you know, we've come up with, Amy has put out some guidebooks on AEM, but I will tell you, and I know this, just talking to people in the industry, not many people are following it to the letter. They're still trying to reinvent the wheel. So they're creating more work, more variation, and ultimately more opportunities to, fail and create errors. So when you ask, how do you do that? You get people to aware, but we are going to need people to participate. And that's been the struggle all along, is getting people to participate in those standards committees, because they take a long time. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It is, I worked when I was with the Technology Management Council. I chaired the Technology Management Council a few years ago with Amy, and we created this planned maintenance definitions guide. And that was just a guidebook, a very short 12-page, I believe, guidebook. That took us months to get through. So when you're creating standards, it can take a long time. But that's not to say just because it's hard, you shouldn't do it. And ultimately, if you can get people to participate and be part of the process, and again, buy into, identify those best practices, the end product will be everybody saving more time, doing things better, raising the bar. The whole industry will improve with that. So
I think that it would make everyone speaking the same language.
Right.
And, we know that we're lacking in biomeds in this industry. And I think that would level the playing field for new people coming in to understand the language, and the codes are across the board. I mean, it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. It does. And for a healthcare in general actually does tend to be very, we're all unique and different. They view themselves. We're a children's hospital. We're a rural hospital. We're a urban center, whatever it might be. Everybody looks at that they're unique and different. And in some cases they are, but the vast majority of what they do is the same. They're working with the same equipment, and it's supposed to be doing the same thing, and they're supposed to maintain it, in a certain way, following the same regulations. And so it's trying to wrap your head around those things where we are the same and can be the same or should be the same, and not get as hung up on those things that maybe we should continue to be unique and different on, because there are going to be those variations that you have to, because again, there's nothing, not everything is the same in healthcare. So I think if we can focus on those areas that we are, have those opportunities, we can really drive and move forward this industry. I really do, as far as, the safe and reliable use and the equipment. So.
And I would think that you'd want the OEMs somehow integrated into this process, wouldn't you?
OEMs, ISOs, everyone. So that's another, okay. So again, you get, we always refer to HTM as it's the in-house organization, but OEMs have HTM organizations. They have a service arm. They have service technicians that provide service on medical equipment. That's HTM. ISOs, the same thing. So we are all, I think when we stop kind of saying they're different from us and they're different from us and they're different from us, and again, look at there are differences, no doubt about it, but we're all, again, working on the same equipment. We all have safety, reliability, cost savings, regulatory compliance top of mind. Then, we can find some common ground. And there's, yes. So, yes, they have to be involved. They should be involved. ISO should be involved. Anyone who maintains equipment and should be involved. So I should
say a big room for a lot of people.
Yeah, I should say everyone, yes. But we need some select. We need obviously a representative from all those areas.
Yeah, I could see that you would. What would be like a date that you're looking at? Is there a year projected?
Oh, no. No. I mean, honestly, so there have been, there's been different standards that have been created around medical equipment maintenance by Amy. but I think everybody will agree that they're pretty loose still, and vague, and there's still some opportunities for improvement. And so it's not like this we're just starting this. I mean, this has been a journey, but I think what has happened up until recent years, there has been a major pushback from the HTM folks to even think about or consider more standards and more standardization, mainly because we don't have, we haven't had the ability to get into a room and start talking about it as a representative group. And then even when that group agrees, then you kind of push it out to the industry, and the industry's like, not going to do it. So, then that's when you start having, you create good standards that are based on real world. So that's important. They have to be real world. And the organizations have to have the ability to implement them, and those implementing them will create a safer, better, more cost-effective environment. And if that's the case, then we would hope that CMS, Joint Commission, DNV then can adopt them as their own standards. And so rather than having CMS, so that the tail wagging the dog thing, I think has happened in the past. CMS and then Joint Commission has come out and said, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. And and I'll be very honest, and I'll say this now because I'm not part of a health system, and I don't worry about them showing up at my door yelling at me. But they're very vague, and they, I think in some cases, were obviously not written by anybody who has ever maintained equipment. And it's terrible to say, but they're not based in real world how things are done, in a hospital setting. And so what happens, I'll use the 100% PM completion thing, which again is another sore point for me. But it's like, it's impossible to complete 100% of all your PMs on time every single time. It's impossible because you have equipment that gets lost. You have equipment that is in use. You have equipment that is waiting for a part from a vendor, all these different reasons. And so, making 100% completion a regulation forces HTM organizations essentially to lie because they're not completing them. What they're doing is that they're closing the work order out, but that is not complete.
That's a great point, Heidi. That's a great point. Yeah. What do you think that the HTM industry is going to say about the cost that would be incurred by each organization to make those changes? I feel like that might be something that might be brought up.
Yes. So again, the costs, I couldn't even begin to say what they might be, but they will, if there's a standardized processes that are pushed out, like anything, whenever there's new regulations, the hospitals have to run around, and the OEMs and the ISOs have to figure out, okay, how are we going to adhere to these? And there are costs involved with changing their policies and procedures to adhere to the new regulations and new requirements. That's what this would instill. But ultimately, the hope is that there will actually be cost savings because you're not spending so much time independently of each other trying to figure out how now to, adhere to these changes. It would be a collective standard, essentially.
Well, especially the different CMMS programs, if everyone made the same changes, it wouldn't be an individual change. It would be a system change if everybody went to it at the same time. I think that would be beneficial.
Right. And
Nuvolo, like everybody who was on Nuvolo as their CMMS program all made the changes at the same time, then maybe it would be a collective cost than an individual cost.
Right. So, okay, we'll use the CMMS example, which is a good example. I would put it if all HTM organizations could agree that these are going to be their work order codes. These are our, we're going to use corrective maintenance, planned maintenance, support services. I'm just kind of rattling some off. initial inspection, all of those, whatever they might be, whatever Amy guidebook says they should be, then, and these are going to be all our failure codes, then all CMMS companies can then configure their CMMS to that is the out of the box configuration for everything. And again, it makes it that much easier if you think about how much time you have to spend cleaning up the data to go into, a new CMMS. Everything would be ready to go, from that perspective. So those are, so ultimately the hope would be that it's going to save you time and money and effort, because again, everything else will be set up accordingly, and you can make those changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I really like the thought that PM is defined.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But that's a simple one. That should be a good one to start with, I would think.
It's a good one to start with, exactly. And there we have, so many different cases of that in the industry, that people are doing things differently. When do you call it? If you're looking for a device, let's say, for its PM and you can't find it, how many times should we look for it before we decide it's no longer in the building? Again, every organization does it very, very differently. Some decide we're just going to keep looking for it. Every 6 months, we're going to go out and look for this device. And if you multiply that by the hundreds of devices that they have they can't find, that is a lot of time. Or some might say we're just going to look for it once and then we're closing it out as the device is retired. But there's this whole variation in there, and who's right, who's wrong, what's the best way. I find it hard to believe that is driven so much by the type of organization it is. When I'm saying that we should be able to agree on that. You look for it twice, you can't find it, you assume that the device is retired and mark it as such. That's a simple one.
That's a simple one. And I came across something last week that invoked this conversation about operational verification checks and electrical safeties.
Right.
And there was 4 different opinions.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I'm like, can we just pick one?
Right.
Right. And we're just trying to get the job done. And do you want it to be electrical safety checked?
Mm-hmm.
And, do an operational verification? Do you want one or the other? It took like several people to get involved in the conversation to figure that out. And that should be standardized.
Right. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be. And again, it's because the industry's been left, and it's done a good job so far, but everybody's operating, in their own little bubble. And then they decide, well, the way I'm doing it is the best way to do it, because I'm doing it that way. So, but that obviously cannot be the case. Everybody can't be the best way to do it. So what ultimately, you're looking at is, what makes the most sense to ensure the safety and reliability of that equipment, at the lowest cost and least amount of effort. And that's a very simple way of putting it, but you never want to hinder the safety and reliability of equipment. But if you're going too far and you're spending too much time doing unnecessary work, in some ways one could say you're actually taking away from the time that people could be spending doing life-saving type of work, so you're wasting your time doing things where you should be spending it doing other things over here that actually have an impact.
And that's a cost savings, right?
Right.
Another thing I think might be great to see standardized at some point is inventories.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of inventories, and they're just the amount of unnecessary information, necessary information, things that are completely missing that you have to ask for, even in an inventory. When was the last PM?
Right.
You get it in several different ways. Right. Yeah. So I could see that would be beneficial in standardizing, how everyone has their inventory listed, but it goes back to your CMMS program because that's where it comes from, right?
Right. But again, if there's standards, so I think I was explaining before, it's like, it's the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail. If we as HTM professionals can develop those standards based on, real world experience and data and analytics and everything else, and doing this in a way that makes a lot of sense, and then have, the regulatory agencies, the CMS, the DMVs, the Joint Commission, adopt those as standards rather than vice versa, rather than them pushing it down and us adopting something that was not really, based in real world. Then I think it makes a lot more sense, and something that will be more practical for all HTMers. And the same goes with the CMMS piece, is if the HTM professionals are driving the standards versus the CMMS companies, because I can tell you most CMMS companies, not all, but most, don't have a lot of people in there who know HTM. They have engineers and they have, architects. And so those folks don't know the industry. And so they're creating software based on their limited knowledge of how it actually works in the real world.
So is there a committee yet? Is there a place where people that might be leaders in this industry can get a hold of you or to Amy to volunteer their time?
Yeah. So at this point, the answer is no. And so Amy, being like any organization and all of us, we have, limited resources and limited amount of, folks that can work on these things. However, I think the first step is, we're trying to get the word out and get people to understand and at least get acclimated to the concept of, because it is a foreign concept, I think, for most HTM organizations. And again, I'm talking about the OEMs, the ISOs, and the in-house organizations to appreciate. But then, we at Amy then will, start collecting interest, like which, because we can't do it all at the same time. You have to prioritize and pick and choose. So which standards should we be working on to make the most sense? And then, we start putting those into a plan, creating a plan for them, and then creating committees and looking for volunteers. So, this is really at the point where I want to get people excited about volunteering and thinking about it and understanding how extremely important it is and how much this work, will mean to the industry as a whole. And then there will definitely be things coming out from Amy in the future about it and what how people can get involved and it might not be just be on a committee. It might just be providing feedback to particular standards or draft standards or things like that. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so I'm excited about that.
So if there's somebody who's as passionate about standardization as you are, yes, can they send you an email and reach out to you, Heidi?
Yeah, I think that would be a good way to start. And I don't want to, I definitely want to make sure that people do reach out. So you can reach me on my email, which is pretty easy. It's Heidi.Horn, Horn, at HeidiHorn.com. So yeah, you can find me pretty easily in that way. And then we'll start collecting some names. And like I said, this is going to be a multi-year process. So this isn't going to come out right away. First step is just to make sure that, as you mentioned before, you couldn't get everybody to agree, even that there is a need to agree. And so I think we need to first step, accept you have a problem. We have a problem. And so then get everybody to like, okay, we admit we got a problem. So this is how we're going to work our way through it to, as an industry, start, working on the low-hanging fruit of things that we can start agreeing on, which there are many things.
I think it's a great idea. And I believe standardization will benefit everyone in time saving, cost savings, and just making the industry more standard in general. So all the new people that we're attracting to the industry, it's not, well, over here we call it this and over there you call it that and you do it like this here, but not like this there. And I think standards are good for the industry in general.
Mm-hmm.
So I gotta ask you, so we always close every episode with a wow, your words of wisdom.
Words
of wisdom. We'd like to hear from you, Heidi, and just to leave the listeners and viewers with something. It's been a great episode, and I want to give you a little time just to close it up for us.
Okay. Well, so I don't know how words of wisdom, but we do pride ourselves in HTM about how, and quite frankly, we know our we're all aging in it. It's an aging industry, and I think that's all the average age is like 55 plus right now. However, I would just remind everybody we're not dogs, and we can learn new tricks. And so my, words of wisdom for the HTM industry is that, always be curious, always want to learn new things, always want to make sure that you're educating yourselves on the latest and best and greatest in the industry. And standardization and standards is one of those new tricks that I think we can learn. And so that would be my words of wisdom is don't be a dog.
I like it. And some of us older dogs can learn new tricks.
We can learn new tricks.
Model, right?
Right.
I learned Excel, so if I got Excel.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, Heidi, it's been great having you on today, and we appreciate your time. We know you're busy to come on and share a little bit about standardizations with the HTM community and where it might be headed. I think it's going to be really intriguing for our viewers and listeners to tune in and see where the industry might be going.
Well, I look forward to talking to everybody and anybody who is interested in getting on, finding out about how getting involved, and we'll certainly keep everybody up to date on that. And thank you again, Cheryl, for having me on your show. It's been fun. So.
Thank you, Heidi. Now, you can find HTM Insider any place you listen to your podcast. You can also listen through TechNation. And when you log on and listen there, if you need the CE credits, you get 1 CE for listening to this podcast today. Thank you for following HTM Insider, and you all have a great day.